Jim Casey made sure that service was the fulcrum on which all business decisions swing. If longevity and economics are any measure, the company's founder's decision was dead on. Our real primary objective is to serve, to render perfect service to our stores and their customers. If we keep that objective constantly in mind, our reward in money can be beyond our fondest dreams, Casey said. How did the company achieve high service levels in all areas of its operation? The company has high standards and is continually making higher ones. Unrelenting problem solving, innovative technology, new services, and choreographed delivery procedures all grease the wheels of UPS's operation. Even one package not delivered, that's a service failure. Drivers often find themselves going out of their way to provide the utmost service, even if it means incurring extra costs to get one package delivered on time. This opening selection comes from the book that I would like to talk to you today about, which is called Big Brown, The Untold Story of UPS, and it was written by Greg Neiman, who was a longtime UPS employee with more than 35 years of service. He started as a loader, he moved up to a driver, and then finally went into management. The author does a really fantastic job at giving us a behind the scenes view of how UPS was founded by Jim Casey, what his vision was for the company as they were expanding and growing, the values he emphasized, such as relentless customer service, and the time tested, long lasting motto of the best service and lowest rates. In addition, he developed a solid bedrock of employees who were empowered as owners of the company and delivered operational excellence, always driving towards that one simple and deep focus, that of service. Early on, as Jim Casey was starting out in Seattle, he could see that there were many delivery companies. And as a customer, well, you could randomly pick any one of those companies. They all did basically the same thing: deliver messages and packages. But for Jim Casey, he saw this and he understood this. After all, it was just a commodities businesses, messages and packages. So he turned his focus to service. And it was this strict focus on service that started to compound over time for Jim. It gave him an edge in business. He delivered his messages and packages on time to the proper location with a clean pressed uniform and always with a smile. This practice that Jim Casey he put into place, it really reminds me a lot of Samuel Cunard, who we spoke about on the last episode. Cunard was focused on being on time with the arrival of his ships into port, and this compounded over time for him. It secured him contracts with the British government to deliver mail across the Atlantic Ocean, and he cut mail delivery time from an erratic 8 to 12 weeks down to 2 weeks. That was amazing at the time that he accomplished that. And he used this compounding superpower to grow his fleet of steamships. He became known for reliability, durability, and a top-notch safety record. Jim Casey and Samuel Cunard, they're both cut from the same cloth, if you ask me. They were both shy men who put others first, but at the same time, they were not afraid to lead in business. In the book, it describes Jim Casey in the following way. Jim Casey was a shy man, anything but flashy. He was diminutive in stature, with sharp features, a long face, and piercing eyes. Fastidious in person, he was always impeccably groomed and seldom wore anything but an understated dark suit, carefully pressed, and of the finest quality. For both Jim and Samuel Cunard, they work on their businesses basically their entire lives. These were their deep, deep loves and where their focus resided. The steam line, Samuel Cunard, he spent 65 years working on his business. And Jim Casey, just listen to this, more than 76 years. Yes, 76 years he worked on building and growing UPS. That is simply incredible. Both of these men, I admire them for their deeply driven nature to focus on the simple and deep elements that compound over time and make both of them wildly successful in their own rights. At the same time, their spirits live on to this very day in the organizations that they both founded. UPS is still in operation, Cunard Lines still in operation. But before we jump into the full story, I just wanted to take a moment and welcome you to the show today. Like how Jim Casey saw there were dozens of messenger services in his early career and he decided to focus on service, I recognize that there are thousands upon thousands of podcasts that you could choose from. Thus, I'm really trying to focus on extracting the highest quality lessons from the books that you and I talk about here on the podcast. I really want to deliver value for your time, and I hope that I can leave you with a few ideas to ponder. And at the same time, we can also gain an understanding of these deeply driven business founders from history, and possibly it's their drive and focus that can feed into our own nature, allowing us to keep the fire going or possibly spark a new flame if you've just been thinking about getting started. Because after all, starting is normally half of the battle. I'm always looking for ideas and suggestions to make the show better or for new book recommendations. If you have any, please feel free to email me at larry@deeplydrivenpodcast.com. And I've been thinking a lot about the format of the show. I like where it's going. I can see that the downloads are starting to pick up a little bit, and that really encourages me. And I really hope that others are finding as much value as I am when I'm reading and outlining and recording the podcast. But I do feel like they're running long sometimes, normally an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I've been thinking about trying to make them a little bit more concise and really focusing on the top ideas in business that we can learn from. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about that quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. And you might see some changes in the upcoming episodes. But for now, we're going to continue to focus on those high quality lessons and let them drive us forward in business in a positive way. The book today that we're talking about, Big Brown. This is a really fun read, and if you'd like to pick up a copy, you can use the link in the show notes. And by using that link, you'll be helping to support children's literacy, as I'm donating 100% of all Amazon affiliate revenues, because that's something that I believe in really deeply, is that of children's literacy. With that, how about you and I hop into the book and check out the life of Jim Casey and UPS. So the book starts out with the author describing how he landed a job at UPS and then went on to join the ranks as a driver. And this pulls us directly into the story of Jim Casey. The author says the following here. I was a 17-year-old Californian right out of high school and had already secured morning employment. Still, I complained to a neighbor who always wore a brown uniform that I needed an afternoon job too. Why don't you go down to UP, he said. Union Pacific, I queried. No, United Parcel. They always need guys to load and unload in the afternoons. So in June, I became a UPSer, even though I wouldn't be 18 until July. Close enough, they said. And I was assigned to load the Arcadia trailer at the old 9th Street sort in downtown Los Angeles, starting at $1.62 an hour. I sorted for UPS and attended community college, but quit the company in January of 1958, after which I entered the U.S. Army. As soon as I returned to Los Angeles in the late 1960s, I headed for UPS. By then I was 21, and they hired me as a seasonal driver. On January 17, 1961, I was called back to join the Hollywood Center as a regular UPS driver. From the very beginning, I had heard stories about the company's tireless founder, the guy who had been pointed out to me a couple of years before. He was a living legend, Jim Casey, the son of Irish immigrants, working from the age of 11 to support a family of 5. In 1907, in a basement beneath a Seattle saloon, he conceived the American Messenger Company, which eventually became United Parcel Service. And Greg says that he would drive for UPS for about 5 years. Right away here through the author's experience, we can see that Jim Casey's drive as a young man delivering packages still lives on today. Drivers have a lot of autonomy, but at their back is a Byzantine system that evolved over 100 years along lines conceived by the extremely disciplined and fastidious company founder, Jim Casey. A wiry little man, Casey began at the bottom. He speedily delivered messages and packages in a turn of the century Seattle on foot. Casey learned about efficiency by doing. Today, optimizing this connection between body and task is the responsibility of UPS's charade of efficiency experts, most of whom were also drivers. They are just as tireless and never stop honing delivery into a fine art. The driver position is one that is not easily obtained because there's often a long waiting list and it can take 4 to 5 years. And while you're waiting, normally you're working a strenuous entry level package handling job, which most of the time is part time. UPS, they really want you to earn your position as a driver. You need to really dig in and show your dedication and your determination to rise up amongst your peers to reach that coveted status of a driver. Greg says that after 5 years, he's going to earn his gold watch for 5 years of safe driving. Past this, he's going to enter management. He would take a job editing local company publications. And then later on, he's going to be promoted to regional staff. This would occasionally put him in the contact with Jim Casey, so he begins to develop a little bit of a relationship with Jim, which leads us to a quote from Jim Casey that I just love. He says, "Service, the sum of many little things done well." Simple and so well said. The sum of many things done well is that of service. It's this service that's going to compound in a big way for Jim and UPS over the years. And this is evidence throughout the book in all ranks of the business. They repeat this mantra over and over again that service is at the heart and core of UPS. The book itself is really focused on UPS, but it also places a lot of emphasis on Jim and some of the other founders. Thus, Jim is really sprinkled throughout the various chapters. So going forward here, what we'll do is we'll take a look at things in chronological order so that we can get a feel for how Jim started out in the business and what it was like growing UPS and all the lessons that he learned along the way that can feed into our businesses and the way that we conduct our operations. Jim is really, really a great teacher for us here. Now, if we go back in time, Jim, he was born in Nevada, March 29th, 1888, to Anne and Henry Casey. His parents, they ran a saloon in one of the little silver mining towns. Jim's father, Henry, he was also said to be a really big dreamer, and he often set off prospecting, but he would show little in return in monetary means. His mother, on the other hand, she was a very hard worker, but she barely made enough to make ends meet. His father, unfortunately, would be diagnosed with miner's lung disease, and this really affected him over time. It sucked up his energy, and his ability to work really declined quite rapidly over the course of 4 or 5 years. So it says that in 1897, Henry and Annie, along with their 3 sons, are going to move to Seattle, Washington. And any type of steady work for Henry is going to be really hard to come by. This was at a time when Jim was starting to become more aware of the way of men and their abilities, and he's really looking at his father in the following way here. Jim was by then old enough to apprehend his parents' mounting anxiety, to understand that his father was not healthy by comparison to other men. In many kids, they see their parents as the strongest people in the world. But by the age of 10 or 11, Jim, he's seeing his father as really struggling. As the oldest, I think this plays into his conscious way of thinking very early on here. And soon, he's going to take dramatic actions to help the family. Now, in that same year, 1897, Klondike fever is going to hit. And we're going to see Henry leave the family that summer, as described in the following way here. He hoped his lungs would hold out, that he would return with enough gold to secure the family's future. One can imagine his emotional departure from his family, Facing more than 1,000 miles of sailing and trekking, the date of his return uncertain, it cannot but have put a burden of responsibility on his eldest son, Jim. I can only imagine a young Jim Casey, what he's feeling. I'm sure that he was hoping that his father would have success, but he must have also had doubts swirling around in his mind, especially as the oldest son. He's really forced to feel the financial pressures early on in life. And it wouldn't take long because Henry is going to return back home. Henry Casey returned to Seattle in one piece, his dreams of riches from the Yukon dead. He was dispirited and depressed, and his health continued to deteriorate. Soon, Henry was unable to work at all. As his dreams ended, his son Jim's began to take shape, inspired by a thriving Seattle and by necessity. The Casey family right here is really in a difficult situation. Jim is 11 and he has no other choice here but to go seek out work. And let's see what's going to happen here for Jim. With two younger brothers to protect and a mother and an ailing father to support, 11-year-old Jim Casey had developed a maturity that belied his age. His family was in precarious straits, and it was up to him to solve the problem. In 1899, Jim shouldered his responsibilities, quit school, and set off to find a job, just as he had watched his father do so many times before. Each day he left on foot for city center, 20-some blocks from home. The streets teem with horses and wagons, people on foot, bicycles and cable cars. Dazzled by the electrifying activity there, he combed downtown, always inquiring about work. More than one person suggested that messenger and delivery boy positions were possible for someone so young. Jim checked around and was directed to Bon Marché, the largest department store in town. With cap in hand, a nervous but straightforward Jim Casey politely asked Bon Marché's personnel manager if the store had any work he might do. The manager sized up the diminutive youngster, almost elfin in appearance. Jim looked even younger than his age, yet he appeared serious and dependable. His mother had taught him to be friendly and to look people straight in the eyes with confidence. Those blue-gray eyes, which could twinkle with levity, now bored earnestly into the manager. Recognizing Jim's courtesy and determination, the manager said, "Our driver could use a helper. It's $2.50 a week. Report tomorrow, 7:45 a.m. sharp." We can see Jim's early determination to secure a job. He's really using adult skills here, looking at people in the eye, appearing serious and dependable, and this landed him his first job. You might ask, how would this work out for him? Let's find out here. The next morning, Jim made his way to the enormous building at the north end of downtown. A manager led young Jim Casey down to a big room in the department store basement, then gesturing to an elderly man. An Irishman, as it turned out, he said. "You go with him today." As the pair climbed into the high front seat of the dray, the driver asked, "Well, lad, what do you know about street numbers?" "Nothing," the young boy admitted. Then, in a thick brogue, the driver explained the fundamentals of delivery, that even-numbered houses were on one side of the street and odd-numbered houses on the other, and the addresses of houses hidden from view were apt to be fractions. Thus Jim's growing familiarity with Seattle's captivating streets and alleyways became a source of income. After only 3 weeks, he quit Bon Marché's for a higher-paying job as a delivery boy for a tea store. There he worked for more than 10.5 hours a day, and longer on Saturdays, starting at $3 a week. His younger sister was born on September 5th, 1900, intensifying the family's financial predicament. So Jim's brother Harry also left school and became a cash boy for Bon Marché's. For a while, the two oldest Caseys supported the entire family on $6 a week. Soon, the youngest brother George also went to work. At just 11 years old, Jim and his brother, who's even younger, are supporting the entire family on $6 a week. And that is just heartbreaking. He had to drop out of school here. And Jim, he has this deep love of learning. Several times in the book, he's described as an autodidact, which is someone who seeks knowledge through books or experiments, personal experiences, and just loves learning. And the fact that he had to drop out of school, that is just heartbreaking. But at this point, he lets Seattle become his new classroom. He doesn't get held back or stifled from learning. He switches his focus and he learns from what is in front of him. We've seen a lot of entrepreneurs on this show working at a really young age. I think back about Henry Ford, Ed Thorpe, Milton Hershey, Sam Zamuri, Sam Walton, Samuel Cunard, just to name a few. But none have been in this sort of position. This is really dire straits for them at such a young age. He's already the breadwinner of the family at just 11 years old. And without his income and his hard work here, the family possibly they die. They really needed this income to stay alive. And this was a lot of weight and pressure. The only other founder that I can think of who might be close to this was possibly Sam Zamuri. When he was like 14 or 15, he immigrated from Russia to America and he went to work for his uncle in Selma, Louisiana. And then shortly after that, he takes an additional job chasing pigs for $1 a week. And he would save his money and later build his banana trading empire. But most of the time, he was sending money back home to his family in Russia. But he wasn't the sole supporter of the family at just age 11. Jim, he really had no choice here. He was forced to drop out of school and go to work to support the family. And for Jim, what he would do is each time he could find a new job that paid a little bit more, he would jump from company to company to company. And eventually he kind of lands at a position for a short period of time here called American District Telegraph Company. And this is where things start to shift a little bit for him. Now, when he starts this new position, he's going to ask for the night shift, working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. so that he could try to attend school during the day. And imagine this, just working all night long and then trying to go to school during the day at age just 11 or 12. And it says in the book that unfortunately that wouldn't last very long for him. He would have a really tough time trying to work all night and then go to school for obvious reasons. This is the point that he would really begin focusing heavily on his work, taking himself very serious in his job and learning his trade. I think for Jim that his purpose in life is really presented to him in the way of delivering messages and packages. And instead of resisting it, he's going to embrace it. And we're going to see some changes or rather developments in Jim. This is his deep drive starting to develop, and he's figuring some things out for himself. Now, at this time, there weren't many telephones in the Seattle area. So when a call or telegram would come in, he would be dispatched out to deliver these messages. And then sometimes he had to wait for customers to reply. And then he would run back to the dispatch center so that those messages could be relayed to the people who sent the first inquiry. But in the book, it also says that he was determined to treat all of his customers with honesty and courtesy, regardless of who they were. And this is really a bold action because you see, sometimes this was a lot more than a messenger and package delivery company. They had a lot of other dirty work that also went on, especially when he was working the night shift. Just listen to this. It wasn't all telegrams. Many of the night calls were drug addicts summoning a messenger to help replenish their stash. For the opium smokers, Jim had to run down towards the waterfront to 2nd Avenue where the entrepreneurial Chinese distributed the narcotic. Jim intrepidly went into these shadowy exotic corridors to the dealers who, for amounts as small as 25 cents, would place dabs of a pasty drug on a card, then fold it up for delivery. ADTC, that was his company he was working for, also supplied the cocaine addicts or snowbirds, whom Jim Casey considered the lowest class of dopers. Then there was booze. Jim became adept at rushing the growler, a popular euphemism for delivering pails of beer. Plus, there's so much more here. Let's keep going. On his flat-topped hat, he sometimes carried trays of food for delivery from restaurants to homes, hotels, and lodging houses. Routinely, he rushed to notify railroad firemen and engineers of emergency runs or odd-hour shifts. He babysat in hotel rooms while parents went out to the theater, pumped the church organ during choir practice, collected bail for jailbirds, and even acted as a detective. Who better to shadow people and report back on their comings and goings than an unassuming young messenger who was on the streets anyways? By now, Jim is maybe 14 or 15 years old, and this is just wild that he was able to even survive. I imagine it really took a lot of grit to deal with these animated situations and doing so in an honest and fair way. This really is the training ground upon which Jim Casey developed, especially the spirit of service. I think long before that term emotional intelligence was ever a thing, Jim was overflowing with it. He maintained his composure and his empathy, and he was steeped with a solid problem solving ability. One saying from John Maxwell that I think applies so well to this situation, he says, anyone can serve a customer on a good day. Excellence is serving them well on a bad day. It's super easy to deliver messages down the street, but running down to the waterfront to get more drugs for a customer or playing detective to see if a spouse is cheating, well, that's tipping into bad day territory. But Jim, he serviced his customers with excellence. This service is the very core foundation for what would become UPS. Service compounds. Jim, he's seeing this, the absolute cornerstone. Service, service, and more service. Jim would take this service mentality, and in 1903, he's going to start his first business called City Messenger Services with just $40 that he had saved up. However, when he got started, things were going to be a little bit slow for Jim and his partner, Tom Sweeney. And after about 2 years, it says that they're going to sell their business and they're going to leave the state and head for Goldfield, Nevada in 1905 in an attempt to stake their own mining claim. Goldfield was a big boomtown for mining, and they really wanted to get in on that action. Unfortunately, they wouldn't be successful in finding a claim, but from my view, they found a different type of claim that's going to hold them over temporarily while they were in town. You see, the telephone was growing quite rapidly at the time, and in Goldfield, they already had around 600 telephones that were all commingled into a central switching station, and with their experience, they're quickly employed here. The boys' timing was terrific. The office manager needed someone to deliver all the messages that kept pouring in. Jim and Tom set up their own messenger business in the corner of the telephone telegraph office. The owner guaranteed them $50 a month. And with all the business, they would soon take on a third partner by the name of John Morowitz. And with this much work pouring in, Jim is going to continue to compound his efforts as described in the following way. According to Jim Casey's recollections, the three learned that service was all they had to offer. Wearing striped pillbox hats and double-breasted jackets with brass buttons, they performed with honesty and worked to the best of their ability in a town where almost anything was likely to happen. That's amazing. I really love this approach. Diving even deeper into service. This was a really wild and crazy town, and they could have just sat back here and kicked their feet up and delivered sloppy service, but they took the opposite approach and they focused on service, and things appear to be going really well for Jim and his crew right here. But as I just mentioned, Goldfield, it's really seedy and it's dangerous. And one night, one of their partners, John, maybe it's just best if I read here what happened. The excitement ended in tragedy. That Saturday night, John Morowitz accidentally ran into a vagrant named John Thompson on his bike. Thompson shot and killed Morowitz. The cold-blooded murder left the two boys stricken. They decided to leave Goldfield. Tragedy is absolutely correct. That is just terrible. An accident, an honest accident, cost their partner John his life. Simply devastating. Past this point, Jim and Tom, they're going to head back to Seattle. And at this time, Jim, he's 19 years old. And for the short time that he was away, Seattle had continued to expand quite rapidly with lots of new homes and businesses. But you see, what many of these homes lacked were telephones and automobiles. These were the new and upcoming technologies. So, to fill the gaps, messenger service demand had escalated quite tremendously across the city. One day, by coincidence, Jim, he would be out and about and he would run into an old friend named Claude Ryan, who proposed that they set up business as they were both very experienced. And he's going to say the following to Jim: Jim, you're just the fellow I'm looking for, Ryan announced. No one in town runs a decent delivery business, and there's one needed. You and I have the experience. Let's set up our own office and go into business. Now, at this point, we're going to see a direct result of Jim's hard work and service mentality starting to pay off for him in the following way. An older friend of the Casey family, James Brewster, agreed to lend the young men $100 to launch their new enterprise. Brewster knew young Jim, recognized his hard-working nature, and most of all, his honesty and sincerity. Brewster's confidence in Jim Casey led to one of America's greatest success stories. The two partners would launch American Messenger Company on August 28th of 1907 from a tiny basement office that they leased below a saloon. They would equip it with 2 telephones, and then they would go out and collect some donated furniture. And it says in the book that the business was an instant success. So much so that they're going to soon hire 6 messenger delivery boys. And immediately we can see that Jim absolutely 100% pours his love of service into this business. As these new boys were coming on board, I see this as the roots of the tree that are starting to push into the soil, and they're gripping deeply as it's reaching towards an endless blue sky right here. They enlisted a team of 6 eager, reliable boys. All received a lesson in good grooming and a flat-top cap with a leather visor. On the front of each cap was a badge with the company name and the messenger's identification numbers. 2 bicycles were available as needed. This is direct evidence of founder imprinting. They were teaching the boys directly in a first-hand manner what was expected. They were leading by example. This focus on quality service was everything. And as we spoke about earlier, anyone can deliver messages or packages, but not everyone can do so in a timely manner with a very high level of service. On top of that, you and I, we've spoke about Henry Ford many times in the past and how he built Ford based upon service. He felt that this was priority number 1. And in a direct quote, Ford says the following: profit must and inevitably will come as a reward for good service. It cannot be the basis. It must be the result of service. And I think this is why Jim Casey was a genius at an early age. He recognizes that service is critical. In the book, it really calls out this early focus. The company offered best service and lowest rates round the clock, including evenings, Sundays, and holidays. The company founded in that 6 by 7 foot basement office would eventually become United Parcel Service. As UPS starts to gain momentum, they're going to take a little bit of a different approach here to build trust and loyalty amongst their customer base. This right here reminds me a lot of Samuel Cunard, who built his steamship business on a strong customer loyalty with honest, fair dealings and being on time when he said that he was going to be there. Let me just read for you here so you can get a feel of how they shaped and molded the market with their clear communications. Integrity was also a key. If a call came in and the messenger was not immediately available, Jim and Claude never answered right away, as did many of their competitors. Instead, they would honestly answer that it might be a few minutes, perhaps even a half an hour. Customers came to know that American Messenger Company messengers always met the time commitment that Jim or Claude made. The partners' first policy became, never promise more than you can deliver and always deliver what you promise. And I just wanted to read that last sentence again. Never promise more than you can deliver, and always deliver what you promise. That is absolute bedrock, and this is what they build their empire upon, always delivering on their promises with a high degree of service. And exactly what are they attempting to build? That is a great question. Let's find out here. Dependability meant 24-hour service, 7 days a week. They wanted customers, especially drugstores, hotels, and restaurants, to depend on American Messenger Company at any hour of the day or night. Claude or Jim often slept on the discarded lunch counter that they used as a desk, awaiting infrequent middle of the night phone calls. Right here, they're showing us their willingness and their desire to move up market. They saw value in developing relationships with the drugstores, hotels, and restaurants because they were larger customers with repeatable business that had a higher profit yield for them. In the beginning, they're doing any jobs that they can to gain business. And it says in the book that they would do things such as walking dogs, babysitting, they would mind people's stores while the owner went out to lunch. They took a blind man to a funeral. Other calls involved transporting heavy objects on the young boys' backs. And then unscrupulous people would often call 3 or 4 messenger services, and they would just hire the one who would show up first. And you see, delivering messages, it paid between 15 to 65 cents per delivery based upon how far the distance was. These odd errand jobs, they only paid 25 cents an hour. So over the course of an hour, they might be able to go out and deliver 4, 5, 6 messages and make a lot more money versus just doing errands for 25 cents an hour. As they start to push up market, they're going to make another discovery here with one of their customers. You see, they had convinced a local clothing store to sign on with their service. This clothing store would highlight the benefits of having a same-day delivery for all of their customers. So all the purchases made by their customers would be delivered to Jim, and then what he would start doing is consolidating these deliveries along with the messages that they had to deliver. So basically, when a message came in, they would go look to see if they also had a clothing delivery to that same area, and they would take them both at the same time. And this yields an even greater amount of revenue per trip. This was the discovery that they made, that they could consolidate 2 in 1. And as a result, they start to see that errand business fall off as they didn't accept it, and they started pushing upstream towards those higher value clients. And I think this is a really valuable lesson for you and I, that we should always be aware of who our end users are and the amount of time that we're investing versus the revenue that's being obtained on a per client basis. Perhaps this is a good time to take a look to see if you're able to push up market in a similar manner. See if you might be able to seek out 1 or 2 bigger clients. I just know from my own personal experience that one good sized contract with a commercial customer for me was worth 50 or 60 direct to consumer customers. And it's a lot easier to deal with one client at the end of the day versus that of 50. Plus, it offers a repeatable business that normally pays on time and it knows exactly what to expect from you. And I just ask, is this something that you might be able to consider doing for your own business in a similar way that Jim Casey did in the early days of UPS, and how he saw that it benefited him by increasing his revenues, and at the same time, it set up a steady supply of business for him. In fact, he would be so happy with this approach that he ends up hiring his brother George Casey in 1911 to go out and drum up new business. And by Christmas of 1912, they would have 75 messengers delivering all of those messages and packages within just 5 years of launching their business. And things are going really well for them at this point. But as with any business, they would soon hit a plateau as described by the author. Even though business was generally good, it began to plateau. New customers were few, and foot messengers could only cover so much ground. Jim and Claude needed to cover Seattle faster and more comprehensively. So, what might they do here? Well, they're going to seek out another competitor, in that of Everett Mac McCabe. He was operating a motorcycle delivery company in the area as well. They would convince Mac to join forces, and he was generally excited to expand his business with this formidable group of young entrepreneurs, and he really shares in their sense of service and their drive. Thus, they're going to form this new company called Merchants Parcel Delivery. In their strategy, I think you can already guess it, would be to focus heavily on offering services to Seattle's department stores, delivering all of their packages. The ones that were close by, they would take them on foot, and then the ones that were further away, they would use bicycle or motorcycles. But with all of these deliveries, they're going to soon run into an issue of trying to deliver on motorcycles, as you can only really stack packages so high on a motorcycle, as you can imagine, and they were kind of limited there. Plus, all the packages, they were also exposed to elements like the rain or the snow, so they really needed a better solution. So, what might they do here? Well, they're going to invest in technology to help them overcome this challenge, and let's just jump into the book here and see what it says. The three entrepreneurs decided to borrow enough money to purchase a new 1913 Model T Ford. After removing the passenger body, they purchased a delivery van body for about $125 and attached it to the chassis. They painted it bright red with the words Merchants Parcel Delivery on the side. And it was this modern technology that allowed them to grow and thrive. Each delivery truck, it could hold up to about 50 packages. Plus, they could also advertise their name on the outside of the trucks. It's interesting to note that UPS has always been a forward-thinking technology company. They invest in the latest innovations, and they push technology to provide the best service possible for their customers. And to see this in action, if we just jump forward in the book here, we can see firsthand in the following selection how UPS embraces technology in their business. Tracking and moving all of these packages, $3.28 billion in 1999 alone, was an IT department's Mount Everest. When Jim Casey defines service as the sum of many little things done well, he never imagined that the little things would be found within microchips. At the time of this writing, David Barnes is UPS's Chief Information Officer. With a budget of $1 billion a year, he manages 4,700 employees who develop much of the company's software, watch over the internet site that draws close to 19 million visitors a day and maintains 8,700 servers, and monitors 15 mainframes capable of processing millions of instructions per second. Barnes's job, just like all others at UPS, is to extract more efficiency from an already efficient operation that moves an average of 15 million packages a day across the world. On Barnes's watch, UPS is pushing automation to the summit with package flow technology. Computerization determines the order in which packages are loaded on a truck and the most efficient route for delivering them, and it makes tracking packages directly available to customers and UPSers. Mind you, that was almost 25 years ago that was written. These early investments in technology that Jim and his partners make, they might seem quite silly to us today, that we think of a vehicle or a telephone as cutting-edge technology, but that's exactly what it was. And Jim knew this, and he knew that it was a tool, and he deployed it in his business in the name of servicing the customer. It's a strong reminder for us to embrace technology in our own businesses, especially if it will service your customers in a more meaningful manner. We can never go wrong with investing in technology. It's going to pay for itself many, many times over. And it really reminds me of the Mars family that we spoke about on episode 6, who built the world's largest candy company. They never hesitate to invest in the latest technology or upgrade their equipment, and they pushed far beyond anything of what their competitors could do. From the book Emperors of Chocolate, We can see a really great example of this. Not content with the speed and accuracy of the manufacturing machinery available at the time, Forrest employed a host of engineers to improve it and adapt it to his own purposes. The result of his effort was the most efficient candy making operation in the business. It wasn't long until Forrest's plants completely out manufactured the competition, operating at speeds no one else could match. By the time he was finished with the Chicago plant, every step in the process, from the mixing of ingredients to the boxing of the bars, was done mechanically. He compressed 20 manufacturing lines into just 5 high velocity operations, capable of producing 2,500 Snickers bars a minute and fun sized Milky Way bars at double that speed. It was all possible because of Forrest's high tech wrappers, the only self loading wrapping machines in the business. It's just amazing what technology can do for us. Forrest Mars pushed technology in his business. 20 machines down to 5, 2,500 Snickers bars a minute. That is just crazy. That's a lot of candy bars. And it really serves as a solid example right here with both UPS and Mars, how they both embrace technology as a means to service their customers' needs in a better fashion. Along with investing heavily into technology, Jim and his team, they're going to bring on partners who could also help them grow the business. So in 1916, they're going to bring on a gentleman by the name of Charlie Soderstrom as a partner. He's going to invest about $10,000 into the company. Now, Charlie, he's about 13 years older than Jim and his other founders, but he's really well seasoned in the delivery business. He came in and approached the business dealings as a fair and equal partner. In addition, Charlie would also be responsible for the UPS brown color that we all know today. As it was described in the book, the partners had heard that bright colors like yellow would attract a lot of attention, and they thought it would be a perfect way to help them with their advertising. However, Charlie, he's going to interject and he's going to say the following. Charlie Soderstrom was appalled. He intervened, explaining that Seattle's department stores presently saw their own vehicles as a great form of free advertising. They would be reluctant to relinquish their deliveries to a company whose conspicuous vans would compete with their own. So at that time, they were trying to gain more and more department stores. And Charlie's thinking is absolutely correct here. Let's keep going. The idea was that merchants' parcel delivery fleet should blend into the background. A carrier painter named Charlie Place told Charlie Soderstrom about recent experiments run by a railroad sleeper car company named Pullman. They found that a certain shade of brown, Pullman brown it was called, held up best when subject to rain, sleet, and dust. The Pullman brown color appealed to Jim Casey, and he knew it well, and he loved to ride in Pullman coaches when he traveled. To Jim and many others, the color symbolized the highly respected railroad industry of the day. Perhaps it will make us equally famous on the streets of America, Casey ruminated, little knowing just how famous their fledgling company would become. And the rest, they say, is history. But when you really study history, you find it's really never resting. It's living, it's breathing, it's unfolding in real time through the people that you and I talk about here on the show. Let's see how Jim keeps pushing forward with his newly painted UPS brown delivery vehicles. For the company, they would soon win a major contract with Bon Marché, and this was one of the largest and busiest department stores in the city. And ironically, it was that very first store that gave a young Jim Casey at just 11 years old his first job. He's come full circle here. He's not sitting on the Bon Marché truck as a delivery boy anymore. He's taking over the entire store's delivery network, and this is going to work big time in his favor right here, as they were soon making 3 pickups a day at Bon Marché, and the feedback from the customers and the store employees was no less than impressive. And as a result, they quickly saw other merchants in the area signing up for their delivery services. To service all of these businesses that were signing up, what they did is they divided the city into sections, and then they started assigning drivers to each one of these sections. This is going to further strengthen their bonds with customers, as these drivers are going to become familiar with their homes, and they would make friendly acquaintances with all of the customers and these end users. The first one here is that this major contract, it really allowed them to dig in deep and prove that they could handle the job and do it better than the department store could do it themselves. It says in the book that the department store, they weren't quite sure at first and they kept their delivery vehicles, but after 2 or 3 months, they eventually ended up selling those vehicles because they didn't need them anymore. They could rely upon UPS. And this visibility right here to also gain them additional high value clients, and it proved that they could continue to swim upstream. And this is a really great example for us that just one bigger client can really develop our muscle for a greater capacity and higher levels of service. The second observation here is that it forced them to develop a system of delivery and connecting with customers. And this really started to build value with residential consumers as they're getting deliveries to their homes from these brown colored trucks and these friendly drivers. They start becoming familiar with this service. And once you become familiar with something, it makes it so much easier to use. Just think about how we use UPS today in our lives, and we don't even think about it. So this really allowed them to become a symbol in people's daily lives as they were making these deliveries. Now, with all of these new customers, this really put Jim Casey's wheels in motion. And the next section that I wanted to share with you reminds me a lot of Sam Walton. Casey was always an observer of his environment and things that were going on around him, and he always worked really hard to put the best ideas into action. This is very similar to what Sam Walton did, and let's just take a look and see how he did this. Jim Casey, always inquisitive, kept his eye on the next step. He wondered if there were similar companies. If so, how are they set up? How do they operate? Might they be doing something from which merchants parcel delivery could learn? Jim wrote the Chamber of Commerce of every American city with a population over 100,000, asking for names of local delivery firms. He accumulated the names of 100 of them, then initiated a communications link that he called the Parcel Delivery Service Bureau. The Bureau was a means of sharing new methods, ideas, or systems that worked in different cities. Every once in a while, the correspondence disclosed a gem of an idea, which merchants' parcel delivery would hurry to implement. And I just love Jim Casey's curiosity here, this outside the box thinking. There was no internet at the time, obviously, and yet he uses what he had at his disposal to try to educate himself on this developing industry. One thing that he felt deep down was that they were onto something quite incredible. And Jim and the partners believed that their system, it really could be replicated out to other cities. They would turn to the bank for additional capital to help them fund their expansion. And out of this, they're going to gain a really major victory in the form of a bank rejection. And how might that be so, you might ask? That is a great question. Let's find out here. And I think this is really elemental to their long-term success and the viability that they would have as a company. Mr. Karstens told them frankly that he would not fund merchants' parcel deliveries' next venture, but they should not interpret his resistance as a disincentive. He finished with the words, "Determined men can do anything." That comment became an invocation. Jim Casey and the company would use it as a rallying cry time and time again. As the years went by, Jim reframed the phrase to his own purpose. Determined men working together can do anything. This rejection is going to force them to become creative in their expansion efforts. And it would eventually lead them to developing a model, a very solid model that's going to allow them to expand city by city and state by state. It's also very similar to how Sam Walton started Walmart. He was undercapitalized, and this forced him to be scrappy, starting out in little towns, building one store at a time. He went almost undetected by the larger retailers who focused on big cities. And it's this hard fought will that allowed Sam to build a repeatable model for his store deployments. It took him 5 years to get his first store started, but after 5 more years, he had 15 stores. Had Sam been well capitalized, he may have started in the big cities first, and his end result, I believe, would have been dramatically different. You know what? It's the same for Jim and his partners. They're going to begin expanding by finding messenger services in other cities that were already established, and then they would work out means to acquire those companies without a lot of upfront cash. Mostly what they would do is they would trade stock in UPS for the companies that they were purchasing. That first company that they acquired was Motor Parcel Delivery. They were located in Oakland, California, and this particular company had fallen on hard times and they went into a receivership. So Jim, he had worked out a deal to acquire them for a little bit of cash, and he's going to take over their operations. And as they started out, it was really well known that there was another company by the name of Merchants Parcel Delivery in San Francisco. And Jim and his team, they envisioned expanding to San Francisco in the very near future, and they didn't want any conflicts with that company. So the founders, they set about renaming their company to have a clear distinction, and it would be their partner Mac who would suggest United Parcel Company. But in the book, it says that Charlie Soderstrom, he was the same one that recommended UPS Brown. He's going to object, and he's going to say the following: "We have nothing to sell except service," he said. Thus, all four men had a stake in the name, and they settled on United Parcel Service. On St. Valentine's Day, 1919, the new Oakland operation was incorporated under the name United Parcel Service, which would eventually be abbreviated to UPS. Jim is going to become the president of UPS, and they're soon going to dominate Oakland and all of the other Bay Area cities with their delivery service. Just a few years after this, Jim, he's going to have the chance to take over a delivery company by the name of the Russell Peck Delivery Company in LA. This company was expanding really rapidly with an aging owner that really wanted to retire. This particular acquisition would change the way that a newly formed UPS is going to approach its business for the long term. I think this is them continuing to push upstream because you see, in addition to retail deliveries, this company that they were acquiring was also doing wholesale deliveries or business to business deliveries. And this was known as a common carrier service. And we're going to talk about this more in a moment. So not only were they capturing business from the retailer to the consumer, they're now also capturing the acquisition of the retail goods into the retailer itself. So they're getting both sides of the business here. This was a whole different ballgame for UPS, one that's going to set them on what would become a quest and a grand vision for Jim Casey to deliver packages in a nationwide manner. To acquire this company in LA, UPS is going to use their newly minted acquisition strategy and pledge shares of UPS stock. Now, one thing that happened here, and this was a major, major benefit for them. I don't know if they foresaw this when they started using this strategy, but it allowed them to retain the top talent of these companies that they're acquiring. These are folks that know the markets and they know the operations, and this was huge for UPS. Now, if we just turn back to that common carrier structure that we mentioned just a minute ago, the book says the following about this particular type of service. Common carrier shipping was regulated by the Interstate Commerce Commission, as well as various state commissions. In the decades before deregulation, shippers needed to acquire the rights to pick up and deliver packages business to business. The Russell Peck Company had these rights, but only in the Southern California area. United Parcel Service took over the rights with the purchase of the company. This put them in direct competition with the U.S. Postal Service. With these common carrier rights, UPS is now able to cover locations within a 125-mile radius of downtown LA by 1929, and this saw them delivering like 20,000 parcels a day. That's a lot of packages for this company at this time. From here, the company is going to expand out to San Francisco, Portland, and they would begin working on saturating the entire West Coast. We can really see that growth is happening in quite a dramatic rate for Jim Casey and his team. And what was that strong catalyst for growth aside from that of service? It was this strategy that they had derived to take over these small mom and pop messenger services, and the author describes it so well in the book. Let me just read for you here. Forced to innovate, their consolidation program of stock offerings in lieu of cash encouraged the dedication of talented people within the delivery companies that they acquired. Rather than a divide and conquer mentality, the founders shared with their newfound associates and prospered. Yet, United Parcel Service was about more than successful strategies. It was about growing a sense of belonging to a business that was helping shape not only the individual's lives of its employees, but also America itself. This really was their key to success, empowering and making people owners in the company. If UPS would have simply just paid cash, these owners and the managers of these firms, most of them probably would have walked away. I've got my cash, I'm done, and I'm out. And you know what? This is the same strategy that John D. Rockefeller took. I'm reading that book, Titan, right now, and it reminds me of a very similar strategy that he used to grow Standard Oil. He would come in and buy out these small refiners, and he always tried to convince them to take stock. And by doing so, he would retain the original founders and the managers of those companies. And then he would empower them to continue to run the business and continue to grow it. So what he was doing is he was building a high performing team of entrepreneurs and leaders. And John D. Rockefeller was simply the ringleader at the top of all of this action. So both John D. and Jim benefit by keeping these founders and operators. They have the tribal knowledge of the business and they don't miss a beat along the way. They can just keep moving forward. For Jim, the industry is so highly regulated. In each city and town, it has its own idiosyncrasies. They really needed these key operators to continue to grow and expand. By making them owners of the company, they were able to retain this top talent. In fact, Jim, he's going to expand this concept out to a larger audience with a profit sharing program, stock purchase options, and manager incentives, which saw the company be 100% owned by employees and founders prior to their IPO in 1999, which is just impressive that they were able to put so much into the hands of their managers and their employees. It's this sense of togetherness and partnership and family that grew them. This is the glue that they really needed right from the start, as they were going to be in for an extremely hard-fought battle to win the distinction to achieve nationwide shipping. And this feat is going to take them more than 68 years. They're going to battle city by city, state by state, to accomplish this goal of nationwide shipping. This was Jim's vision, and he drove hard to accomplish it. And you might ask, why in the world did it take so long to accomplish? Well, my friend, it came down to the ICC, as we mentioned earlier. They were set up in 1887 to regulate the railroads to ensure fair rates. They also held the reins over the economics and services of carriers that move goods between state lines and business to business. A lot of times they simply just stood in the way. And we all know that government regulation is a nightmare anyway. And to add to this pain, they were also allied with the U.S. Postal Service. Thus, they really had to battle day in and day out. Over time, they generally wore down the ICC, but this took a long time. They're going to start in Chicago. Slowly, they would expand to the 4 states that bordered Illinois. And then a few years later, they would break into Boston and start infiltrating those eastern states. Then, after that, they start slowly filling in the Midwest and the southern states. And it's going to take them until 1975 to finally achieve Jim's vision of nationwide delivery to any address in the lower 48 states. This was a great triumph for the company. And I think perhaps it's one of the longest term visions that we've seen materialize as of yet on the podcast. I mean, 68 years from the time Jim started in business, the relentless push with service as the heart and soul of his company. Like so many that we've studied on the podcast, Jim Casey, he had this super deep drive. He reminds me a lot of Samuel Cunard. They were both quiet men. They observed their surroundings, but communicated clearly, and they knew the absolute power of one simple thing: compounding. If you deliver quality service time and time again, others will absolutely notice. And over time, you're going to have an incredible advantage against your competitors. Let time and the power of compounding drive you forward in business, my friend. And I believe you will have great success. So if we focus back into the book here, at this point, the author dives into how UPS got into transporting packages by air. And I thought I would just touch on 2 major lessons from this section before we wrap up, and then I'll close with a brief personal experience about using UPS. So in 1929, UPS is going to begin experimenting with air delivery. And it says in the book that this quickly caught on. And at the time, Jim and his team, they wanted to expand operations into New York. And thus they really needed a lot of capital to make this happen. So they're going to work out a deal to sell UPS. Yes, sell UPS. Now, this is at the bottom of page 143 in the book, so it's fairly deep into the reading. And after all that you and I have covered up to this point, they're just now talking about selling? I mean, what in the heck is this? They're going to get $2 million and 600,000 shares of Curtiss Aeroplane stock in exchange for UPS stock. And if I keep reading, it says the following. According to the agreement, the 3 still active UPS partners, Everett McCabe, Jim Casey, and his brother George Casey, would remain with the company to oversee the planned expansion. They were guaranteed management control for a 5-year period, drawing a considerably high salary of $25,000 each per year. The terms of the deal anticipated and assumed that they would remain indefinitely after the initial 5-year period. I was actually a little bit upset here with the author. I mean, Jim's selling the company in 1929. So basically, this whole time you're reading the book, you're telling me that Jim is not the owner, and I'm just now finding out this in the book. I kind of feel like I've been taken for a ride on one of their big brown trucks. But there must be a reason. Surely there's a reason. So let's just keep reading forward here and see what happens. Right away, Casey had misgivings. And I'm thinking, damn right he did. He busted his ass for 30 years up to this point, and you're freaking selling out? All right, let's keep reading. Things are going to turn here. Regret and worry moved in to occupy his mind. He and his partners had given up control for everything they had built over the previous decade. More important, Casey doubted that the new guard would honor their commitment to his loyal employees, upon which rested United Parcel Service success. These men had become stockholders expecting to share in the company's profits over the coming decades, and the abrupt payoff and stock in another company was certainly not what they had been expecting. The quick payoff seemed at odds with everything Casey, his partners, and the company had represented when they made United Parcel Service stock available 2 years earlier to employees. Just as abruptly as the offer to merge had fallen into their laps, so did the solution to undo it. And what would undo this deep regret that Jim had? Well, in October of 1929, the stock market's going to crash, and the holding company that had bought UPS was basically dead in the water. They were an airline business, and basically all airline travel had come to a halt, so they didn't have any revenues coming in. Jim's going to work out a deal to regain control of the UPS stock, but it's going to take him 4 years to accomplish that feat. But in the end, Jim, he really dodged a bullet here. If this had taken place perhaps a year or two earlier, possibly there's no UPS today. He immediately had this deep regret and was fortunate that he was able to retain control of his company. As we learned from another founder, Joe Colomb, over at Trader Joe's on episode 3, he said the following when asked if he regretted selling. I have to admit the truth that I regret having sold Trader Joe's, and I've had to pay something for this beyond the loss of my shadow. It's a really big decision to sell your company or give up equity and control. And I just urge you to think deeply about those actions. If you're deeply driven and this is the love of your life, then what is the next thing that you're going to do after you sell? I think we can learn right here from Jim and Joe Colomb as they both had deep regrets for selling. And I just urge you to give it a lot of consideration. Talk to your family, your trusted advisors, and learn from history's greatest entrepreneurs and let them speak wise words into the decisions. Just think carefully, my friend. I just urge you to think about that and think about what you're going to do after you've sold. Do you have something lined up that you love and want to focus on deeply? So if we flip back to the book, after I got past this section, I understood why the author put it so late in the book, and it made a lot more sense in my mind, and I was calm and I wasn't upset anymore. And it's just one of the reasons I love books. They're roller coasters up and down, and this was a good roller coaster. And I felt the spirit of Jim return to UPS. The core focus was working towards nationwide transportation, as we had learned just a few moments ago. During this time, when they were trying to gain this nationwide shipping status, they really saw the U.S. Postal Service as their main competitor. And they had pulled back on air transportation during the Depression, but they brought it back under the name UPS Blue Label Air. What they were doing was mostly just using commercial airlines to fly packages between major cities, and this was very limited. This wasn't their primary focus until they are hit square in the eyes by FedEx, who in the early 70s would explode into the air business, setting itself up as an airline that just happened to deliver packages and deliver them overnight, right in the face of a napping UPS. Let's just hop into the book here and learn a bit about Fred Smith and FedEx. Former Marine pilot Fred Smith and his FedEx was, by any measure, sheer genius. That FedEx was established in 1973 as an airline, not as a ground delivery company, is an important legal distinction because the company was exempt from onerous common carrier regulations. Airlines fall under a different regulatory body, the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, not the ICC that regulated trucking companies, including UPS. And even though FedEx also had trucks, its corporate structure exempted it from the ICC regulations. And FedEx didn't intend to start up city by city as UPS always had. The concept was hatched nationwide with just one hub from the very beginning. Smith designated it to work systematically, the way a clearinghouse does. It copied how UPS was using its ground hubs, a concept that the passenger airlines also emulated to set up hub and spoke airport layout systems. For example, UPS packages from all over the metropolitan area arrive at a central hub in each city. Then they are sorted and dispatched to all destinations similarly, but on a much larger scale. All packages, no matter where they come from or where they are bound, flew into one hub, Memphis, Tennessee. Flying and sorting at night, when air traffic was lighter, facilitated one-day delivery. This was pure genius by Fred Smith, and it allowed them to avoid 65 years of struggles that UPS went through. They were considered an airline. They didn't have to battle the lethargy of the ICC. They went nationwide right from the start. And I hope to cover Fred Smith in the near future for you. And what they accomplished was a great feat at that particular time. And I think that we can learn a lot from Fred Smith as well. For FedEx, this gives them an 8-year gap in time, which they would continue to grow before UPS was eventually able to catch up. If we just stop and think about that for a second, FedEx saw a gap and they attacked it and they were successful. It reminds me of Elon Musk, how he saw a gap with space travel and he developed the Falcon rocket. Now look at what SpaceX is doing. No company is even close to launching as many rockets as they put into space and then landing them for reuse. Over 500 times they've landed those rockets and they've reused them. No one does that today except SpaceX. Joe Colomb over at Trader Joe's, he saw a massive gap in the fair trade laws that allowed him to sell wine for way less than anybody else in the industry. And this really fueled his rapid growth in business. Then Henry Ford, we learned about him on episode 1. He created the Model T, a car for every man. Herb Kelleher, he made air travel affordable for everyone, especially business and leisure travelers in Texas in the 1970s. He wasn't competing against other airlines, he was competing against ground transportation. It's all about the gaps in the market, my friend. When we see them, we have to aggressively take them down. Formulate plans and drive hard because as soon as you do, someone is coming after you, almost guaranteed. As you're filling that gap, grow your team with talent and control cost aggressively, and always keep your eyes and your ears open for the next place where you can wedge yourself in and take a foothold. Now, eventually, UPS would get off the ground, and it says that in the book by 1985, the UPS next day air would be available in all 48 states. And then past this, they're going to expand globally, servicing more than 200 countries and territories worldwide today. This, my friend, is really a fantastic story about Jim Casey and UPS. For all the details, I would highly, highly suggest picking up a copy of the book. It's extremely informative and it has a lot of details on UPS and how the spirit of service that Jim Casey instilled into the operation was and is the driving force behind all of their growth from its origins to this very day. Now, as we close out here, I just wanted to take a moment and share a brief personal account with my own UPS experience. To date, my wife's company has shipped approximately 15,000 packages with UPS over the last 4 or 5 years. And all in, she's only had to file 4 claims for lost or damaged packages, which is simply phenomenal, as she was using the Postal Service for many years, which constantly lost packages and encountered delays almost all of the time. Claims were probably 4 per 1,000 or maybe a little bit higher. She eventually went over to FedEx, which was a little bit better, but they were notorious for missed deliveries. When she finally went to UPS, it was really like a weight lifted off of her shoulders. With each package that you ship, they give you an estimated delivery date. 97 to 98% of the time, they are delivered on this estimated date. They've really done a fantastic job. So, reading this book, it's just deepened my appreciation for Jim Casey and the UPS organization. I can really feel the spirit of service that Jim Casey embedded into the company, and it's alive and it's well. And for that, I say a big thanks to Jim Casey and UPS. With that, we'll go ahead and close down for today. If you can, pick up a copy of the book for your library. The link is in the show notes. If you do use that link, you'll be helping to support children's literacy, as all of the affiliate revenues are being donated to that cause. It's one that I believe in very, very deeply. Thank you for listening today. I hope that you found some value in this episode. And if you did, maybe you could just do me a quick favor and leave me a review on your favorite listening platform. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. And I thank you in advance. As always, it's been a great pleasure. I hope to see you back here soon. Until next time, make it a beautiful day in the neighborhood, my friend.